The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at the tall windows of their private chambers. Her fingers traced the cold glass while she watched the grounds below come alive with activity. Staff members moved with unusual urgency, their faces bearing the weight of unspoken sorrow that had settled over the entire royal household. William entered quietly behind her, his footsteps barely audible on the ancient stone floors. Even without turning around, Catherine could sense the heaviness in his presence. The past few weeks had changed him in ways she had never seen before. The man who had always carried himself with royal composure now seemed fragile, as if the very foundation of his world had begun to crack. "The children are asking questions again," Catherine whispered, her breath creating small clouds of condensation on the window. George wanted to know why everyone looked so sad. "Charlotte keeps asking when things will go back to normal." Her voice caught slightly on the last word, because deep down she knew that normal was something they might never experience again. William moved closer, his reflection joining hers in the glass. His eyes, usually so bright and determined, appeared hollow and distant. "What did you tell them?" he asked, though his voice sounded mechanical, as if he was simply going through the motions of conversation. "I told them that sometimes grown-ups have to make very difficult decisions," Catherine replied, finally turning to face her husband. "But William, how do we explain something that we can barely understand ourselves?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross, yet both knew they eventually must. The weight of their situation pressed down on the room like a physical presence. Outside, the world continued spinning. People went about their daily lives, completely unaware that behind the castle walls, two people who represented the future of the British monarchy were facing the most devastating choice of their lives. William's hands trembled slightly as he reached for Catherine's face, his thumb gently brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "I keep thinking there must be another way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There has to be something we haven't considered, some solution we haven't found yet." But even as he spoke the words, they both knew the truth. The circumstances that had brought them to this moment were beyond their control, larger than their personal desires or even their love for each other. The institution they served, the crown they would one day bear, demanded sacrifices that seemed almost inhuman in their scope and permanence. Catherine leaned into his touch, closing her eyes as if she could somehow block out the reality of their situation. "Do you remember our wedding day?" she asked suddenly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth despite the tears. "You were so nervous that morning. You kept adjusting your uniform, checking your watch, asking if I was really going to show up." William's expression softened for the first time in days. "I couldn't believe someone like you would choose this life," he said. "Choose me with all the complications and responsibilities that come with being part of this family." "I chose love," Catherine replied simply. "I chose you, William. Not the prince, not the future king, just you." Her words carried the weight of absolute truth, but also the devastating irony of their current situation. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside made them both stiffen. Every unexpected noise, every unscheduled visitor, every phone call now carried the potential to be the final piece of news that would seal their fate. They had learned to live in a constant state of anticipation, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the final demand that would tear their world apart. A gentle knock interrupted their moment, and Catherine quickly wiped her eyes before calling out permission to enter. Their private secretary appeared in the doorway, his usually composed demeanor clearly strained. "Your Royal Highnesses," he began formally, then paused, seeming to struggle with the words he needed to say. "What is it, James?" William asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would bring more pain. "The Prime Minister's office has called," James replied carefully. "They need an answer by tomorrow morning. The media speculation is becoming impossible to contain, and the public deserves to know the truth about the situation." Catherine felt her knees go weak, and William's arm immediately encircled her waist for support. Tomorrow morning, after weeks of hoping for a miracle, for some last-minute reprieve, they now had less than 24 hours to make a decision that would change everything. After James left them alone again, William and Catherine stood in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds, each sound a reminder that their time was running out. Outside, the sun began to break through the morning mist. casting long shadows across the room that seemed to mirror the darkness settling over their hearts. "Whatever happens," William said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him, "I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Not being a prince, not serving the crown, but simply being your husband." Catherine turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had been her anchor through every challenge they had faced together. "And whatever tomorrow brings," she replied. "Nothing can ever change what we've built together, what we've shared, what we mean to each other." But even as they held each other close, both knew that some things in life are bigger than love, bigger than personal happiness, bigger than the dreams they had carefully constructed together. The weight of duty, of responsibility to something greater than themselves, pressed down upon them with crushing finality. The farewell that would shatter Britain was coming, and there seemed to be no power on earth that could stop it. The afternoon sun filtered through the ancient stained glass windows of St. George's Chapel, casting colorful patterns across the stone floor where William and Catherine had once exchanged vows, filled with hope and promise. Now, as they walked down the same aisle hand in hand, every step felt like they were moving toward an inevitable ending rather than a beginning. Catherine's heels echoed softly against the stones, a lonely sound that seemed to emphasize the emptiness growing between them, and everything they had once believed their future would hold. She squeezed William's hand tighter, drawing strength from his presence while she still could. "I used to come here as a child," William said quietly, his voice mixing with the whisper of their footsteps. "After my mother died, I would sneak away from my tutors and sit in that corner pew." He pointed to a shadowed alcove near the altar. "I would talk to her, tell her about my day, ask her what I should do when everything felt impossible." Catherine looked at the spot he indicated, imagining a young boy sitting alone trying to make sense of loss that seemed too big for someone so small to carry. "What did you tell her?" she asked gently. "That I was scared," William admitted, his honesty cutting through years of royal training that had taught him to never show weakness. "Scared of disappointing people, scared of not being strong enough, scared of losing everyone I loved." He paused, turning to face Catherine fully. "I'm that scared little boy again, Kate. I don't know how to protect what matters most to me." They reached the altar where they had promised to love, honor, and cherish each other for better or worse. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that they were about to face the ultimate test of those vows under circumstances they could never have imagined on their wedding. Catherine reached up to touch the small cross necklace she always wore, a gift from William on their first anniversary. "Remember what you told me that day when the press was particularly vicious about my background?" she asked. "You said that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice we make every single day." "I still believe that," William replied, though his voice carried a note of desperation. "But what happens when choosing love means destroying everything else? When it means letting down millions of people who are counting on us?" The question hung between them in the sacred space, unanswered because there was no easy answer to give. They had always known that their love story was also a public trust, that their personal happiness was inevitably intertwined with their duty to the British people and the Commonwealth. A side door opened quietly, and King Charles entered, his footsteps slow and measured. His face bore the weight of the impossible position he found himself in, caught between his love for his son and daughter-in-law and his responsibility to the institution he had waited his entire life to lead. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Charles said, his voice carefully controlled but unable to hide the pain beneath. "But we need to discuss the arrangements for tomorrow's announcement." William's jaw tightened and Catherine felt him stiffen beside her. "Father, surely there must be something else we can try," William said, though they all knew that every possible avenue had already been explored and exhausted. "The Archbishop has spent the morning in prayer," Charles continued, his eyes avoiding direct contact with either of them. "The Prime Minister has briefed the cabinet. The Commonwealth leaders have been notified. William, the machinery of state is already in motion." Catherine stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Your Majesty, may I ask you something as a mother, not as a king?" The formal address felt strange in her mouth when speaking to the man who had become like a father to her, but the gravity of the situation demanded the respect of protocol. Charles nodded, his expression softening slightly. "If this were happening to you and Camilla, what would you choose?" Catherine asked. "If you had to pick between love and duty, Between personal happiness and serving the crown, what would you tell your heart to do? For a moment, the king's carefully constructed composure cracked, revealing the man beneath the crown. His eyes filled with unshed tears as he looked at the couple, who had brought so much joy and stability to the royal family. "My dear Catherine," he said quietly, "that's the question that has haunted our family for generations. Edward chose love and lost his throne. My mother chose duty and lost the man she wanted to be with before my father. And you?" William pressed, needing to hear his father's truth. "I tried to have both," Charles admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "And in trying to have both, I caused pain to everyone I loved, including your mother. The crown doesn't allow for compromise, William. It demands everything. Or it demands nothing." The weight of his words settled over them like a shroud. 3 generations of the same impossible choice, the same heartbreak, the same sacrifice demanded by an institution that was bigger than any individual, no matter how powerful or privileged. Catherine walked to the altar rail where she had stood as a bride, her fingers tracing the smooth wood where she had placed her bouquet years ago. "I keep thinking about all the children who dream of fairy tale weddings," she said. "All the little girls who watched our wedding and believed that love could conquer anything." "It can," William said fiercely, moving to stand behind her. "Our love has conquered so much already. The media scrutiny, the public pressure, the constant demands on our time and energy. We've built something real and strong and beautiful together. But not strong enough to survive this," Catherine replied, her voice breaking for the first time that day. "Not strong enough to overcome what's being asked of us now." Charles approached them slowly, his own heart breaking as he watched his son and daughter-in-law face the same impossible choice that had defined his family's history. "There's still time," he said quietly. "The announcement doesn't have to be made tomorrow if you're not ready. The longer we wait, the harder it becomes on everyone," William replied, turning to face his father. "The speculation is already tearing the country apart. People deserve to know the truth, even if the truth is going to break their hearts as much as it's breaking ours." Outside the chapel, the world continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that inside these ancient walls, a decision was being made that would change the course of British history. The sun was beginning to set, painting the stained glass windows in deeper, more somber hues, as if even the light itself was preparing for the darkness that tomorrow would bring. As they prepared to leave the chapel, Catherine took one last look at the altar where their dreams had begun. Tomorrow those dreams would end, and the farewell that would shatter Britain would finally become reality. The evening air was crisp as William and Catherine walked through the private gardens of Kensington Palace, their children's laughter echoing from the playground they had specially installed years ago. George was pushing Charlotte on the swing while little Louis chased after a football, completely absorbed in the simple joy of play. For a moment watching them, both parents could almost pretend that their world wasn't about to change forever. "They have no idea," Catherine whispered, her voice catching as she watched George help his sister down from the swing, with the careful gentleness that reminded her so much of William. "They think this is just another evening, just another family dinner ahead of us." William's hands were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white with the effort of maintaining control. "How do we tell them?" he asked, the question that had been haunting him all day. "How do we explain to our children that everything they know, everything they've counted on is about to disappear?" The weight of their decision pressed down on them as they watched their children play. These 3 innocent souls who had been born into extraordinary circumstances, who had learned to navigate the unique challenges of royal life with remarkable grace, were about to face the biggest disruption of their young lives. "Mummy, Daddy," Charlotte called out, running toward them with her arms outstretched. Her face was flushed with excitement, her hair slightly messy from playing, looking every inch the normal 7-year-old she was despite her royal title. Catherine knelt down to catch her daughter. Pulling her into a tight embrace that lasted longer than usual, she breathed in the sweet scent of Charlotte's hair, memorizing this moment, this feeling of her child safe and happy in her arms. "Can we have hot chocolate with dinner?" Charlotte asked, looking up at her mother with bright, trusting eyes. "And can we watch a movie afterward? George says we can pick whatever I want because he picked last time." "Of course, darling," Catherine managed, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Whatever you want." William reached down to ruffle Charlotte's hair, his touch gentle but his expression distant. Even this simple interaction felt different now. weighted with the knowledge that their family time together was measured in hours rather than years. George approached more slowly, his expression serious in the way that reminded everyone he was destined to be king someday. At 10 years old, he had already developed an intuitive sense for when the adults around him were troubled, even when they tried to hide it. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking between his parents with concern that seemed far too mature for his age. "You both seem sad today." William and Catherine exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Their oldest son's perceptiveness had always been both a blessing and a challenge. He noticed things other children missed, asked questions that cut straight to the heart of matters they would have preferred to keep simple. "We need to have a family talk after dinner," William said carefully, crouching down to George's eye level. "There are some important things we need to discuss with all three of you." "Important how?" George pressed, his voice carrying a note of anxiety that made Catherine's heart break a little more. "We'll explain everything later," Catherine said, forcing a smile that she hoped looked more convincing than it felt. "Right now, let's just enjoy our evening together." But even as they herded the children inside for dinner, both parents knew that this wasn't just another family evening. This was goodbye to the life they had all built together, goodbye to the dreams and plans they had made, goodbye to the future they had all been working toward. Dinner was a bittersweet affair. Catherine had asked the kitchen to prepare all of the children's favorite foods, as if somehow a perfect meal could soften the blow of what was coming. William found himself studying each of his children's faces, trying to memorize their expressions, their gestures, the way Louis got chocolate on his nose and Charlotte giggled at her little brother's messiness. "Tell us the story about when you and Mummy first met," Louis asked suddenly, his 4-year-old voice bright with interest. William and Catherine looked at each other across the table, both thinking the same thing. Their love story, which had once seemed like a fairy tale with a guaranteed happy ending, was about to become something else entirely. A story of love that wasn't quite strong enough to overcome duty, of dreams that couldn't survive the weight of reality. "You've heard that story 100 times, George protested, though his tone was fond rather than annoyed. "I like it," Louis declared stubbornly. "It's a good story." Catherine reached across the table to squeeze William's hand. "Daddy was very handsome in his university uniform," she began, her voice taking on the warm tone she always used when telling this particular story. "And very shy. He could barely look at me without blushing." "That's not true," William protested with mock indignation, falling into the familiar rhythm of the story they had told so many times before. "I was suave and confident." "You spilled your drink on my shoes," Catherine reminded him, and for a moment, both of them were lost in the memory of that simpler time when their biggest worry was whether they would find a table at their favorite cafe. The children laughed, Charlotte clapping her hands with delight at her parents' playful banter. For these few precious minutes, they were just a normal family sharing a meal and memories, the weight of tomorrow temporarily forgotten. But as dinner drew to a close, reality began to intrude again. William kept checking his watch. Catherine kept glancing toward the window as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. The time for difficult conversations was approaching, and neither of them felt ready to shatter their children's innocent happiness. "Can we build a fort in the living room before bed?" George asked hopefully, "like we used to do when we were little?" "You're still little," Charlotte informed him with the absolute certainty that only a 7-year-old could possess. "Am not." "Are too." "Enough, you two," William said gently, but his heart wasn't in the usual parental arbitration. Tonight, their childish squabbling sounded precious to him, another normal moment that was about to become a memory. As they moved to the living room, Catherine caught William's arm. "I can't do this," she whispered urgently. "I can't sit there and watch their faces when we tell them their whole world is about to change." "We have to," William replied, though his voice shook with the effort of being strong. "They deserve to hear it from us in our own words, before the whole world knows." They settled into the familiar comfort of their family living room, the children arranged around them on the sofa, completely trusting and content. Outside, London continued its evening rhythm. Millions of people going about their lives with no idea that the royal family they admired was about to be torn apart. William took a deep breath, knowing that the next words out of his mouth would change everything, for the three most important people in his world. The evening air was crisp as William and Catherine walked through the private gardens of Kensington Palace. their children's laughter echoing from the playground they had specially installed years ago. George was pushing Charlotte on the swing while little Louis chased after a football, completely absorbed in the simple joy of play. For a moment, watching them, both parents could almost pretend that their world wasn't about to change forever. "They have no idea," Catherine whispered, her voice catching as she watched George help his sister down from the swing, with the careful gentleness that reminded her so much of William. "They think this is just another evening, just another family dinner ahead of us." William's hands were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white with the effort of maintaining control. "How do we tell them?" he asked, the question that had been haunting him all day. How do we explain to our children that everything they know, everything they've counted on, is about to disappear? The weight of their decision pressed down on them as they watched their children play. These three innocent souls who had been born into extraordinary circumstances, who had learned to navigate the unique challenges of royal life with remarkable grace, were about to face the biggest disruption of their young lives. "Mummy! Daddy!" Charlotte called out, running toward them with her arms outstretched. Her face was flushed with excitement, her hair slightly messy from playing, looking every inch the normal 7-year-old she was despite her royal title. Catherine knelt down to catch her daughter, pulling her into a tight embrace that lasted longer than usual. She breathed in the sweet scent of Charlotte's hair, memorizing this moment, this feeling of her child safe and happy in her arms. "Can we have hot chocolate with dinner?" Charlotte asked, looking up at her mother with bright, trusting eyes. "And can we watch a movie afterward? George says we can pick whatever I want because he picked last time." "Of course, darling," Catherine managed, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Whatever you want." William reached down to ruffle Charlotte's hair, his touch gentle but his expression distant. Even this simple interaction felt different now, weighted with the knowledge that their family time together was measured in hours rather than years. George approached more slowly, his expression serious in the way that reminded everyone he was destined to be king someday. At 10 years old, he had already developed an intuitive sense for when the adults around him were troubled, even when they tried to hide it. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking between his parents with concern that seemed far too mature for his age. "You both seem sad today." William and Catherine exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Their oldest son's perceptiveness had always been both a blessing and a challenge. He noticed things other children missed, asked questions that cut straight to the heart of matters they would have preferred to keep simple. "We need to have a family talk after dinner," William said carefully, crouching down to George's eye level. "There are some important things we need to discuss with all three of you." "Important how?" George pressed, his voice carrying a note of anxiety that made Catherine's heart break a little more. "We'll explain everything later," Catherine said, forcing a smile that she hoped looked more convincing than it felt. "Right now, let's just enjoy our evening together." But even as they herded the children inside for dinner, both parents knew that this wasn't just another family evening. This was goodbye to the life they had all built together, goodbye to the dreams and plans they had made, goodbye to the future they had all been working toward. Dinner was a bittersweet affair. Catherine had asked the kitchen to prepare all of the children's favorite foods, as if somehow a perfect meal could soften the blow of what was coming. William found himself studying each of his children's faces, trying to memorize their expressions, their gestures, the way Louis got chocolate on his nose and Charlotte giggled at her little brother's messiness. "Tell us the story about when you and Mummy first met," Louis asked suddenly, his 4-year-old voice bright with interest. William and Catherine looked at each other across the table, both thinking the same thing. Their love story, which had once seemed like a fairy tale with a guaranteed happy ending, was about to become something else entirely. A story of love that wasn't quite strong enough to overcome duty, of dreams that couldn't survive the weight of reality. "You've heard that story 100 times, George protested, though his tone was fond rather than annoyed. "I like it," Louis declared stubbornly. "It's a good story." Catherine reached across the table to squeeze William's hand. "Daddy was very handsome in his university uniform," she began, her voice taking on the warm tone she always used when telling this particular story. "And very shy. He could barely look at me without blushing." "That's not true," William protested with mock indignation, falling into the familiar rhythm of the story they had told so many times before. "I was suave and confident." You spilled your drink on my shoes, Catherine reminded him, and for a moment, both of them were lost in the memory of that simpler time when their biggest worry was whether they would find a table at their favorite cafe. The children laughed, Charlotte clapping her hands with delight at her parents' playful banter. For these few precious minutes, they were just a normal family sharing a meal and memories, the weight of tomorrow temporarily forgotten. But as dinner drew to a close, reality began to intrude again. William kept checking his watch. Catherine kept glancing toward the window as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. The time for difficult conversations was approaching, and neither of them felt ready to shatter their children's innocent happiness. "Can we build a fort in the living room before bed?" George asked hopefully. "Like we used to do when we were little?" "You're still little," Charlotte informed him with the absolute certainty that only a 7-year-old could possess. "Am not." "R2. Enough, you two," William said gently. But his heart wasn't in the usual parental arbitration. Tonight their childish squabbling sounded precious to him, another normal moment that was about to become a memory. As they moved to the living room, Catherine caught William's arm. "I can't do this," she whispered urgently. "I can't sit there and watch their faces when we tell them their whole world is about to change." "We have to," William replied, though his voice shook with the effort of being strong. "They deserve to hear it from us in our own words, before the whole world knows." They settled into the familiar comfort of their family living room, the children arranged around them on the sofa, completely trusting and content. Outside, London continued its evening rhythm. Millions of people going about their lives with no idea that the royal family they admired was about to be torn apart. William took a deep breath, knowing that the next words out of his mouth would change everything for the three most important people in his world. The darkness outside Kensington Palace seemed to mirror the heaviness that had settled over the royal household. Catherine sat in the nursery, rocking a tearful Louis to sleep while Charlotte lay curled up beside her, her small body still occasionally shuddering with the aftermath of her sobs. The little girl had cried herself into exhaustion, unable to understand why her parents had to live apart, or what it meant for her own future. Down the hallway, William stood outside George's bedroom door, his hand raised to knock but unable to follow through. Behind the closed door he could hear nothing, which somehow seemed worse than if his son had been crying or shouting. The silence suggested a level of hurt and betrayal that cut William deeper than any public criticism ever could. Finally, he turned the handle and stepped inside. George was sitting at his desk, staring out the window at the London skyline. His young shoulders squared in a way that reminded William painfully of himself at that age, trying to bear responsibilities that seemed too heavy for someone so small. "George," William said softly, approaching his son with the same careful consideration he might use with a wounded animal. "Can we talk? Is there anything left to talk about?" George replied without turning around, his voice flat and emotionless in a way that was more disturbing than anger would have been. William sat on the edge of George's bed, close enough to offer comfort, but far enough away to respect his son's need for space. "There's a lot to talk about," he said. "About what this means for you, for your brother and sister, for your future." "My future," George repeated bitterly, finally turning to face his father. "You mean the future where I become king of a broken family? Where I have to choose between love and duty, just like you're doing now?" The maturity in George's voice, the weight of understanding in his young eyes, broke William's heart in ways he hadn't known were possible. "I hope not," he said honestly. "I hope that by the time you wear the crown, the world will be different. I hope the choices won't be so impossible. But you don't know," George said. "Nobody knows. You're gambling with all of our lives, and you don't even know if it will make anything better." William reached out to touch his son's shoulder, relieved when George didn't pull away. "You're right," he admitted. "I don't know. Your mother and I are making the best decision we can with the information we have, but we could be wrong. We could be making the biggest mistake of our lives." "Then why do it?" George asked, his voice cracking with the effort of holding back tears. "If you're not sure, if you don't know what will happen, why tear our family apart?" "Because sometimes," William said carefully, "not making a choice is also a choice. Sometimes waiting and hoping for things to get better on their own just makes everything worse for everyone involved." George was quiet for a long moment. staring down at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was very small. "Will I still see you? Will you still be my father?" "Oh, George," William said, pulling his son into his arms despite the boy's initial resistance. "I will always be your father. Nothing in this world, no law or duty or constitutional crisis can ever change that. You are my son, and I love you more than my own life." George finally broke down then, his carefully maintained composure crumbling as he sobbed against his father's chest. All the adult understanding, all the premature wisdom about duty and sacrifice fell away, leaving just a 10-year-old boy who was scared and confused and heartbroken. "I don't want things to change," George cried. "I like our family the way it is. I like having Sunday morning pancakes and playing football in the garden and watching Mummy braid Charlotte's hair for school." "I know," William whispered, his own tears falling freely now. "I love those things too. I love our life together more than I've ever loved anything. Then why can't we keep it?" It was the question William had been asking himself for weeks, the question that had no satisfactory answer. How do you explain to a child that sometimes the people in power make decisions based on fear rather than love? That sometimes institutions protect themselves at the expense of the individuals who serve them? That sometimes the very thing that makes you special also makes you a target? Because sometimes, William said finally, loving someone means protecting them from things that could hurt them, even if that protection causes a different kind of hurt. Meanwhile, in the nursery, Catherine had managed to get Louis to sleep, but Charlotte was still awake, her eyes red and puffy from crying. The little girl looked up at her mother with an expression of bewildered trust that made Catherine's chest ache with the weight of what they were asking their children to endure. "Mummy," Charlotte whispered, "are you and Daddy still going to love each other even if you can't live together?" Catherine smoothed her daughter's hair, the simple gesture one she had performed thousands of times but which now felt precious and limited. "Yes, darling," she said. "Sometimes grown-ups love each other so much that they make very hard choices to protect that love and the people they care about. But if you love each other, why can't you just tell the mean people to go away?" The innocent question captured the fundamental unfairness of their situation so perfectly that Catherine had to bite her lip to keep from breaking down completely. "Because sometimes the mean people have more power than love does," she said. "But that doesn't make love any less real or important." Charlotte considered this with the serious concentration she applied to all of life's puzzles. "When I grow up," she announced, "I'm going to make sure that love always wins." "I hope you do, sweetheart," Catherine said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "I hope you live in a world where that's possible." As the night wore on, both parents found themselves moving through the house like ghosts, checking on sleeping children, straightening rooms that would soon be disrupted by their absence, trying to memorize the details of a life they were about to leave behind. They met in their own bedroom near midnight, both exhausted by the emotional toll of the evening but unable to sleep. Tomorrow would bring the official announcement, the media frenzy, the public reaction to news that would shock the nation and the Commonwealth. "How do we do this?" Catherine asked, sitting on the edge of their bed, still wearing the same clothes from dinner, as if changing into night clothes would somehow make their situation more real. "How do we wake up tomorrow and face the cameras and the questions and pretend we're strong enough for this?" William sat beside her, the familiar weight of the mattress shifting under them both. This bed had been their sanctuary for years, the place where they had shared their deepest fears and greatest joys, where they had comforted each other through the worst of the public scrutiny and celebrated the best of their private moments. "We do it the same way we've done everything else," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Together, even when we're apart. We protect the children, we serve the people, and we hope that somehow, someday, there will be a way back to each other." Catherine turned to look at him, studying the face she knew better than her own. The lines around his eyes had deepened over the past few weeks, the weight of their impossible situation aging him in ways that years of royal duty had never managed. "What if there isn't?" she asked quietly. "What if this is really goodbye forever?" William reached for her hand, their wedding rings catching the soft light from the bedside lamp. "Then we'll have had something beautiful," he said. "Something real and true and worth every sacrifice. Our children will grow up knowing that their parents loved each other completely, even when love wasn't enough to keep them together." They sat in silence, both lost in memories of their journey together. From nervous university students to confident public figures, From newlyweds learning to navigate royal protocol to experienced parents raising the next generation of royals, they had built something extraordinary together. "I keep thinking about our first Christmas at Sandringham," Catherine said suddenly. "Remember how terrified I was? I was convinced I would say the wrong thing or use the wrong fork or somehow embarrass you in front of your entire family." William smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness she had seen on his face in days. "You were perfect," he said. "You charmed everyone from the Queen down to the youngest page. My grandmother told me afterward that she had never seen me look so content." "And now?" Catherine asked. "Now I'm about to lose the best thing that ever happened to me." William replied, his voice breaking, "And there's nothing I can do to stop it." The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, marking the beginning of what would be their last day as a family living under the same roof. Tomorrow evening, Catherine would leave Kensington Palace with Charlotte and Louis, while George would remain with William as heir to the throne. The arrangement had been carefully negotiated to minimize disruption to the children's lives, but they all knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "Promise me something," Catherine said, turning to face William fully. "Promise me that no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter how painful the announcement or how terrible the public reaction, you'll remember this moment. Remember us here together, still choosing love even in the face of losing everything." "I promise," William said, pulling her into his arms one last time as husband and wife. "And you promise me that you'll never doubt that you were loved completely, that you were cherished and honored and treasured every single day we had together." "I promise," Catherine whispered against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, trying to memorize everything about this moment that would have to last her through all the lonely nights ahead. Outside their window, London slept peacefully, unaware that when the sun rose, their beloved royal family would announce a separation that would send shockwaves through the British Isles and around the world. The fairy tale was ending, not with the happy ever after everyone expected, but with a sacrifice so profound that it would change the monarchy forever. As they held each other in the darkness, both William and Catherine knew that they were living through the last moments of their life together. Tomorrow would bring duty, responsibility, and the kind of public service that demanded everything of them. But tonight, for just a few more hours, they were simply two people who had loved each other completely and were about to pay the ultimate price for that love. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and drizzly, as if the English weather itself was mourning what was about to unfold. Catherine stood at the bathroom mirror, applying makeup with hands that trembled slightly despite her best efforts to remain steady. She had chosen a navy blue dress, something dignified and appropriate for what would likely be one of the most photographed days of her life. William appeared in the doorway behind her, already dressed in his formal suit, his face bearing the composed expression he had perfected over years of public appearances. But Catherine could see the pain in his eyes, the way his jaw was set with tension, the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his tie. "The cars will be here in an hour," he said quietly, his voice carefully neutral in the way it became when he was trying to maintain professional distance from overwhelming emotions. Catherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They had rehearsed what they would say, practiced the careful language that had been crafted by constitutional experts and public relations specialists. Every word had been chosen to minimize damage to the monarchy while acknowledging the personal cost of their decision. A soft knock at the bedroom door interrupted the heavy silence. "Come in," William called, and George appeared, dressed in his school uniform but looking far older than his 10 years. "I wanted to say goodbye before you leave for the palace," George said, his voice steady but his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. Catherine knelt down to his level, her heart breaking at the formality in her eldest son's demeanor. This was how he was protecting himself, she realized, by retreating into the protocol and dignity that had been drilled into him since birth. "This isn't goodbye forever," she said gently, reaching out to straighten his school tie. "You'll see me this weekend and we'll talk every day until then." "I know," George replied, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced that anything would ever be normal again. William placed a hand on his son's shoulder, the gesture conveying all the love and regret he couldn't put into words. "You're going to have to be very brave today," he said. "There will be photographers and reporters, and people might ask you questions about things you don't want to talk about." "I won't say anything," George promised. I know what's expected of me. The mature response from such a young boy was heartbreaking. Catherine exchanged a look with William, both of them recognizing that their decision was forcing their children to grow up far too quickly, to shoulder responsibilities and handle public scrutiny that no child should have to endure. Charlotte and Louis appeared in the doorway, still in their pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes and looking confused by the unusual activity in the house so early in the morning. Charlotte ran to Catherine, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist and holding on tightly. "I don't want you to go," Charlotte whispered, her voice muffled against Catherine's dress. "I know." "Sweetheart," Catherine replied, kneeling to hold both Charlotte and Louis close. "But remember what we talked about last night. Sometimes grown-ups have to do difficult things, but it doesn't change how much we love you." Louis, still too young to fully understand what was happening, looked up at his mother with trusting eyes. "Will you be back for dinner?" he asked innocently. The simple question nearly undid Catherine's carefully maintained composure. "Not tonight, darling," she managed. "But very soon. I promise." The sound of cars arriving outside signaled that their time was up. William glanced out the window and saw the familiar black vehicles that would transport them to Buckingham Palace for the most difficult press conference of their lives. "It's time," he said quietly. Catherine stood, smoothing down her dress and taking one last look around the bedroom that had been their private sanctuary. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday morning, but nothing would ever be the same again. As they made their way downstairs, their private secretary was waiting with final briefing notes and a reminder of the schedule for the day. The announcement would be made at 11 a.m., giving the morning news programs time to prepare, but ensuring maximum coverage for the evening broadcasts that most people watched. "The Prime Minister's office has confirmed they're ready," James informed them. "The Archbishop of Canterbury will be available for comment afterward, and the Commonwealth leaders have been briefed on the timing." Catherine barely heard the logistics being discussed around her. All she could think about was the fact that in a few hours, the entire world would know that the fairy tale was over, that the couple everyone had invested their hopes and dreams in had been forced to make an impossible choice. The children gathered in the entrance hall to see them off, a small family portrait that would be their last as a unit living under the same roof. George stood straight and formal. Charlotte clung to her favorite stuffed animal, and Louis waved cheerfully, still not understanding that this wasn't just another day of royal duties. William kissed each of his children goodbye, lingering longest with George, whose stoic expression reminded him painfully of himself at that age, trying to be brave in the face of circumstances beyond his control. Catherine's farewell to the children was almost too painful to watch. She held each of them as if she could somehow imprint the memory of this moment permanently in her heart, as if love alone could bridge the separation that was about to tear their family apart. As they walked toward the waiting cars, Catherine reached for William's hand one last time. "Whatever happens today," she said, her voice barely audible above the sound of the engines, "I want you to know that I would make the same choice again. I would choose you, choose our family, choose this love, even knowing how it ends." "And I would choose you," William replied, squeezing her hand. "In any life, in any circumstances, I would always choose you." They dropped hands as they reached the cars, both knowing that from this moment forward, they would have to maintain professional distance in public. The intimate touches, the shared glances, the unconscious synchronization of two people who had become one unit over years of marriage, all of that had to end now. As their motorcade pulled away from Kensington Palace, Catherine looked back through the rear window at their home, at the windows where their children stood watching them leave. The sight of George's serious face, Charlotte's tearful expression, and Louis's confused wave would haunt her for the rest of her life. London passed by in a blur of gray streets and familiar landmarks, each one now taking on the weight of memory rather than daily routine. The city where they had built their life together would continue spinning on its axis, but their world was about to stop completely. At Buckingham Palace, the media was already gathering, sensing that something significant was about to be announced. The speculation had been building for weeks, but nothing could have prepared the country for what they were about to hear from the couple they had grown to love and admire above all others. The throne room at Buckingham Palace had been transformed into a press conference venue, its grandeur providing a stark contrast to the devastation about to be announced within its walls. Two podiums stood side by side, close enough to suggest unity but far enough apart to emphasize the separation that was coming. The assembled media representatives sat in hushed anticipation, their cameras focused on the empty space where Britain's most beloved royal couple would soon appear. William and Catherine waited in the adjoining room, both staring at the closed doors that would soon open to reveal their private heartbreak to the world. Catherine's hands were clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles had turned white, while William stood with military precision, his training taking over when his emotions threatened to overwhelm him. "Your Royal Highnesses," the press secretary announced quietly, "it's time." The doors opened and they walked into the room together for the last time as a united couple. The camera flashes were immediate and blinding, the sound of clicking shutters creating a symphony of documentation that would preserve this moment in history forever. William approached his podium first, his movement steady despite the weight of what he was about to say. Catherine took her place beside him, her posture perfect, her expression composed, every inch the princess she had become over their years of marriage. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began, his voice carrying clearly through the room despite the tremor that only Catherine could detect. "Thank you for being here today. The Princess of Wales and I have asked you here to share news that is both deeply personal and profoundly significant for the future of the British monarchy." He paused, his eyes finding Catherine's for just a moment, drawing strength from her presence even as they prepared to announce their separation. After careful consideration and extensive consultation with His Majesty the King, the Prime Minister, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, we have made the difficult decision to live separately while we navigate the constitutional challenges that have arisen regarding our future roles within the monarchy. The room erupted in surprised murmurs, but William continued steadily. "This decision has not been made lightly. It represents a sacrifice of our personal happiness in service to the institution we have sworn to serve and the people we have promised to put first in all things." Catherine stepped forward to her own podium, her voice clear and steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "Our love for each other remains unchanged," she said, each word carefully measured. "Our commitment to our children remains absolute. Our dedication to the British people and the Commonwealth remains unwavering. But sometimes serving those we love requires choices that break our hearts." The questions came immediately, a barrage of inquiries about the reasons for their decision, the future of their children, the implications for the succession. William and Catherine answered with the dignity and grace they had perfected over years of public service. But each response felt like another nail in the coffin of their shared life. "Will this separation be temporary or permanent?" asked a senior royal correspondent. William and Catherine exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "We cannot predict what the future holds," William replied. "Our hope is that time and changing circumstances may allow for different solutions, but we cannot make promises we may not be able to keep." "What does this mean for Prince George's future as heir to the throne?" came another question. "Prince George will continue his preparation for his future role," Catherine answered, her voice steady. Despite the pain of discussing her son's future without her daily presence in his life, he will receive the same education and guidance that has been provided to heirs to the throne for generations. As the press conference continued, both William and Catherine felt as though they were watching their life together being dissected and analyzed by strangers. Every private moment they had shared, every decision they had made as a family, was now subject to public scrutiny and speculation. The final question came from a young reporter who had covered their entire relationship, from their university days through their wedding and the births of their children. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said, her voice gentle with understanding, "what would you want the British people to remember about your time together as a couple and as working royals?" For the first time during the press conference, both William and Catherine's composure cracked slightly. Catherine wiped away a tear that had finally escaped despite her best efforts, while William's voice caught as he began to answer. "We would want them to remember that love is real," he said finally, "that two people can love each other completely and still be forced to make impossible choices, that serving something greater than yourself sometimes requires sacrifices that seem unbearable." Catherine nodded, adding, "We would want them to know that every day we spent together was a gift. Every moment we shared with them, every public engagement, every private family time was filled with genuine joy and purpose. That doesn't end just because our circumstances are changing. And we would want them to know, William concluded, that our children are surrounded by love, that they will continue to be raised with the values and principles that will serve them and their country well, and that this decision, as painful as it is, was made out of love for them and for all the people we serve. As the press conference ended and they prepared to leave the podium, William and Catherine stood together one last time before the cameras. Without speaking, they reached for each other's hands, a final gesture of unity and love that spoke louder than any words they had shared. The image of that moment, their hands joined as they faced an uncertain future apart, would become one of the most iconic photographs in British royal history. It captured the essence of their impossible situation. Two people deeply in love, forced apart by circumstances beyond their control, choosing duty over personal happiness in service to something greater than themselves. As they left the throne room, walking side by side but no longer as a couple, the sound of camera shutters followed them into the hallway. Outside, the news of their separation was already spreading across social media. Television broadcasts and newspaper websites around the world, Britain had lost its fairy tale. But in watching William and Catherine's dignified sacrifice, the nation had also witnessed something profound about love, duty, and the price of serving others. The farewell that shattered Britain had also revealed the true character of the couple everyone had grown to love, showing that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the greatest sacrifices. Their story would continue, but separately now, each carrying the memory of what they had shared and the hope that somewhere in the future, love might find a way to triumph over the forces that had torn them apart. The monarchy would survive, their children would thrive, and the British people would remember that they had been served by two individuals who had given everything, including each other, in service to the crown.